Good afternoon, everyone. I am Vivian Shu, Chair of the Personnel Board at Town of Needham. As a preliminary matter, permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Richard Lanetta,
Here.
Joseph Herlihy.
You're on mute,
Muted,
Joe.
Joe. You're on mute. You're
Here.
not muted, you're on mute.
Here.
Thank you. And staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Chuck Murphy Ronvaletti,
Here.
Tatiana Swenson,
Here.
and Karis Lustig. Nice to have you
Here.
with us today. Thank you, Karis. There are no other anticipated speakers on the agenda, so let me introduce the remote open session. This open meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the outbreak of COVID-19. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that some attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you, things in your background. Take care not to screen share your computer, and anything that you broadcast may be captured by the meeting. Thank you. So Chuck and Tatiana, if you'd like to open the agenda.
Sure. Thank you, Vivian. And thank you, board members. So the main item on the agenda tonight is a proposed reclass of several positions within the NIPIA union, all housed within the DPW. So with us is Karis Lustig, the DPW director. Before you have several memos in your packets. And before I kick it over to Karis, who will explain the specific areas where it's believed these positions are due for reclassification, I'll just give by way of background and some background on how these proposals came to be. So as I summarized in the memo, I've been in discussions with Karis and her department over the past several months, if not more, on some of these changes. Some of the classifications of these positions specifically had changed pretty significantly with the implementation of the class and comp plan back in July of 2021. And since then, Karis has been evaluating the impact they had on the organizational structure, staffing, and other division operations. As I also noted in the memo, so Karis was not in her current role of Director of Public Works during the time that we undertook the class and comp study, and specifically when the job analysis portion was going on of the class and comp study. And actually, in fact, at the time of the job analysis portion, there were several positions in the DPW leadership that were either vacant at the time due to leave of absence. There was a couple leave of absences going on, and there was also some significant turnover in DPW leadership. So, with all that in mind, and really in the spirit of getting it right and ensuring all those 130 plus positions in that study were scored accurately and equitably, I have been receptive to reviewing the request that was put forth. So, Karis had gone through, and in reviewing those positions, so I think it's important to note that the data that we followed the same exact process as we did for the class and comp study to evaluate those positions. So Karis collected JAQs from incumbent employees. Those are job analysis questionnaires. So she collected questionnaires from all the incumbent employees in those positions, had those reviewed by their supervisors, and then reviewed again by DPW leadership. So taking all of that into consideration, the HR department then reviewed how the stated descriptions of the jobs compared with the original scores, And then again, in terms of the internal equity of similar scored positions within the plan. So ultimately, based on the HR department's review, we believe there are several areas of the position scoring that should be given more appropriate consideration. The specific changes in scoring of each and resulting changes in classification are in the memo to the board. And again, before I turn it over to Karis, I also just want to be sure to mention that during the job evaluation exercise, we paid specific attention to the position itself. And I think that's just important to reiterate again. Doesn't have to do with any current incumbents' qualifications. Current incumbents may have much higher degrees of qualifications, more experience, higher skill levels. But specific attention was paid to just the position itself. And throughout the analysis, we looked at what caliber of qualifications would be needed and expected of someone coming into the position as a new hire. And that's been especially important, not only to ensure equal pay of our current employees, but also as turnover happens and we look to attract the appropriate caliber of candidate based on the work that's being conducted. One of the main things the class and comp plan does is it serves as a basis for recruitment. It serves as a basis for screening and then also for selection of employees as it directly relates to the job that's out there. It also serves to clarify promotional ladders and other opportunities for, say, lateral changes throughout the divisions. We see this in DPW specifically. So all that said, that's just more of the reason why it's so critical to have a logical and accurate grouping of job classifications. And which is why we're receptive to these changes and think that they are at the end of the day necessary. So with that brief intro, I'll kick it over to Karis to kind of give just a brief summary of what's in the memos that all of you have in terms of the specific positions and what we saw as needing some more appropriate credit due to that.
Thank you, Chuck. I'm going to do my best to not repeat too much of what Chuck had said, but this particular issue came to my attention. It was around negotiations last year with the NIPIA union. It was one area they accepted the town's implementation of the new class and comp plan, but these 5 positions in particular were areas in which they felt that the class and comp study did not accurately reflect the position that they had. And so they had an interest in continuing a conversation about those positions, which I was open to as well. I think one of the challenges that you have when you're combining so many different unions and so many different types of positions into a pay structure that's only 15 different tiers is that it doesn't necessarily equate for the inherent hierarchical structure that you have in each department. So there are positions that were grouped together that, in my mind, from an operational perspective, did not seem appropriate. So I'll start with those first. So it's actually kind of going backwards in my memo. So the water treatment operator and the wastewater operator position in the current structure, they are identically classified, are in the same grade as the HMEO and the crafts worker position, which requires significantly less licensure and less responsibility. So when looking at those positions historically for the town, that's been a promotional opportunity for somebody in an HMEO or a crafts worker job. You do need to attain additional licensure and have different additional contact hours. It's not a simple process to go through. So by pulling those positions in the same classification, we have eliminated an incentive for current employees to go for those classifications. And in fact, we just had, we have a few people who are leaving in a very short order in those classifications, particularly the water treatment operators. Our 2 operators are likely to retire within the next 6 to 18 months. There are very few people in the industry right now who have these licenses at all. So attracting people is going to be very difficult. And also incentivizing people in our own organization is also going to be difficult based on the licensure and also just the responsibility that those individuals take on for public health. So that was one of the areas when we looked at it. We sort of looked at the JAQs. I went through it had all the employees fill out the JAQs in this position. And then I actually went through it with the union representation and went through each JAQ to see how they had scored themselves. And for the water treatment plant operators, for example, we saw that they had evaluated themselves as 1 to 3 years of experience. Well, no, I would never hire a water treatment plant operator who's only had 3 years of experience in water. What they really meant was 1 to 3 years experience holding a T1 or T2 license. So I think some of the answers that were given as part of the COP in class was sort of based on employees' understanding of the process, given that they don't do HR as part of their normal job functions. And I don't necessarily know if in DPW at the time, there was a really rigorous review of that information to make sure that it held. So the same is also true for the waste water operators and the public works technicians positions. We have 2 of them, 1 in highway and 1 in water. And again, these are very niche specific licensed positions that have traditionally been seen as a promotional opportunity from a crafts worker or HMEO position. They do require additional licensure, and they also do not work under the supervision of a foreman. They are sort of independent actor type positions within our organization. And that wasn't necessarily captured in the initial JAQs and comp and class. The last group that's in here is the fleet group as a whole, the master mechanics and the mechanic. To be frank, I think the master mechanic was hard to evaluate. We had 1 person in that position, and that person did not actively participate in our comp and class process. The equipment mechanics, after sort of seeing the results of the comp and class, were very unsure as to why they were classified the same as an HMEO or the same as a crafts worker, given the fact that they do require fairly extensive education. And one of the things Chuck and I have gone back and forth on, and I think we're still working on refining, is really thinking about what technical school means as far as an education requirement goes. You hire a mechanic who has an education in their very specific trade. There's no associate's degree in it. But you do either go through a technical school at the high school level, which is a highly focused education, or you go for a program after high school to become a mechanic. So we were trying to figure out how to quantify that information as well. So those were the 5 positions that the union had asked us to reevaluate. And in looking through, and I think on all of them, it wasn't necessarily even just one area where it felt like it wasn't accurately represented, but there were a few different areas, largely around the area of technical skill, experience, education, and independent action that we wanted to be able to capture as part of this reevaluation. The 6th individual that we're looking at is the scale house attendant, which is a position that's just at the RTS. The position was retitled and reclassed as part of a comp and class. Originally, that individual did submit an appeal that was rejected through our internal process. I did have a hard time with that at the time. I couldn't see the difference. This particular person is the person, if you've been to the RTS, who sits in the trailer. They deal with the scale. They deal with the public and receiving payments for dropping off bulky items, dropping off waste. They deal with all the contractors who drop off there. And they actually provide air traffic control for the entire facility. So they, if you ever stand there and watch on a Saturday, it's sort of like a little ballet that goes on, but they make sure that all of the trailers get emptied and the workflow is coordinated so that the right materials are in the right place for the right equipment. And this individual also has to backfill for our HMEO positions when we have a vacancy. So oftentimes this position also is in a piece of equipment. And so the fact that this actually got graded below the HMEOs didn't make a lot of sense for their internal structure. So we ended up having an audit done at the RTS this summer on their operations. And it was conducted by an outside firm. And they actually came to me, it wasn't the scope of the audit, but on this particular position, indicating that several individuals down at that facility had been concerned about the classification of it. And that having gone through the responsibilities that position follows that it did not make any sense from an internal perspective, just within that one entity, that would be the lowest graded, that would be graded lower in that position, lower than the HMEOs and the crafts workers who work in that facility. So those are the 6 requests we've had. We're just looking at moving them up 1 grade. No one in DPW is anywhere near the max for their pay, so it's not really making a large difference for the individuals that are there, other than it gives them a higher ladder to climb. I think there's a lot of, to be honest, professional and personal integrity in our hierarchy and how things in DPW are managed. When you have a crew on a job, who's your first person, who's your second person, and who's your third person is really important. So I think that's really the main reason that the union was looking to push forward a change. For me, it's really about recruitment and retention. I have several positions that are opening. I actually will be posting a public works technician very shortly. Nobody else within our organization has the licensure that is required. And I'm concerned that the lack of incentive, the lack of additional promotional opportunities is a reason for why people have not pursued that professional certification. So that's really my main motivation for putting this forward, is to make sure that we can still stay competitive for these very specific licenses that are difficult for us to get.
And yeah, so with that, we'll take any questions, I think, from the board. And
Chuck, as these positions that Kara just spoke to, and you increased their points, how does that line up with others in your system with those same points and their grade? Is there consistency throughout the system, or are these somehow red circled and done differently?
no, the internal equity was a big piece of the methodology when we looked at evaluating the positions again. So
Okay.
as we went through each of the 9 criteria that we evaluate the positions on, we look at other like positions and say if someone had a comparable experience level, and were the things that Karis was describing, were those more so than this position or less? So we always use the internal equity as kind of a benchmark when we are evaluating some of the specific criteria throughout, to try to keep that.
Gotcha.
equity
I just have one more point, and it really is to acknowledge the fact that it's great that you're making sure that not only is there internal equity, but if you have to go to replace this position, you're not going to go to the street and be up against a brick wall. So I think that's forward thinking. It makes a lot of sense to me from an HR perspective. I hope this step pays off when you got to go fill this position again, and it works for you. So good luck there.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I mean, Chuck, when you were making your preliminary comments, you know, we have always said we need to look at these job descriptions and the classifications and compensation structure for what happens when you want to fill the position, that we're not tailoring it to the incumbent, that we're really saying, you know, who do we need to put into that role if the position opens. And so, Karis, I'm very happy to hear that it will be a useful recruitment tool. And I also think it's giving opportunities to our current staff so that, you know, they will stay with the town. We've got many employees who stay with the town for years and years. And I think to be able to feel that they have those opportunities for advancement will incentivize them to go out and get the licenses and stay current with what they need to do. You know, it's a world that's changing in terms of the expectations for what they need to do in terms of their job function. So, thank you. My one last question about this is, you know, obviously the new system is relatively new. It was adopted last year. Did you have a need to do any kind of comparables with other towns and communities in terms of this position,
No,
these positions?
we didn't do any comparable for compensation's sake. We've been told by the consultant. So the way they come to compensation, the way they come to calculate compensation for the grades is that they collected comparable data for each of the positions within the grades, averaged that out for each position, and then took an average of the averages. So if we were to look at each of these positions and try to get some more updated data, well, first of all, we would have to also get similar fiscal year data for the other positions within the grade if we were going to make any changes. But even if we went back and tried to get other comparable compensation data from that fiscal year, it may not have much of an impact at all. It would have such a minimal impact because of the way it's calculated. The consultant recommended that we look at compensation holistically every 3 to 5 years, I believe it was, in which you would undertake a full process where you would collect data on all the positions in each grade and then redo that averaging of the averages. So we didn't do any as part of this exercise.
Thank you.
Yeah. Chuck, to your point on going out doing a salary survey, it may be important to do that on a rolling basis as opposed to doing it, chunk it all at once. It may be easier. Whether you move on it or not is another story, but at least it won't just overpower with a lot of work in terms of processing what the market surveys tell you. One more point to Karis, if I may. To the remaining grade 3 positions in your department, are you going to get any why not me comments, or?
No, I think, in some ways we're looking at the structure that was there before we did the class and comp for our own internal program. And for the most part, the comp and class study did keep sort of the internal hierarchy intact, with the exception that it just sort of smushed these groups together, like the public works technician and the HMEO that had been separate before. So I think that there's a pretty strong feeling for everyone. And I will say it was a little bit of a struggle in our union because they were on a 1 through 7 scale before we went into this new system. So like there are people before who were 4s and now they're 3s. Do you know what I mean? Like that, even though it isn't a change, it makes it more confusing. I think if it had been like ABC, it would have been a little bit easier. But I think these positions are so specialized and the licensing is so specific that it's easier. I do have a struggle and I'm trying to work it out. We had a couple appeals that I think had validity, but were difficult to deal with. So we had some appeals from heavy equipment operators who have lots of licenses. So the base for a position is a few licenses that are specific to each division. Each division requires different things. And we have some people who are just very, very talented operators who have, several different hoisting licenses to them. So we're trying to figure out internally what's a better mechanism for compensation. It would be silly to have I think they used to have in DPW like an HMEO 1, an HMEO 2, an HMEO 3, and an HMEO 4. But is there some other way financially to recognize that, you have a group within a wider band of HMEOs and some are brand new and just learning, and some have lots of licenses and are very proficient. So we're trying to figure that out outside of the compensation schedule, because I think that schedule is just too tight with having 15 slots in it to get into the minutia of some of these different groups. So I think we'll be good. Everything else flows pretty well within our organization. There weren't any other major changes. And I'll say the only major change we had, other than the ones that I referenced, was our public works inspectors and our foremen have sort of over the years seesawed as to who was a higher grade than the other. And that flipped in this last class and comp. And I'll just say one of our public works inspectors is a union rep and they didn't bring it up to me. So I'm going to say I'm not concerned about that.
Gotcha. Given the fact that the system is a relatively new one to the town, what's your department's feeling? Do they put stock in it? What's the general consensus? Because Chuck and team went through a lot of work, and we all did, to get this new thing up and running. What's the feeling?
I mean, I think generally when the union signed on to the contract last year and they did accept the comp and class study, I think they were happy that for every single person in the DPW, most of which were at max, we've got a lot of longevity here. it showed that they were being compensated below what the market bore, all of them, and they were able to get into a step schedule, which is great. Now we're going through a lot of transition. We have, I think, 17 vacancies in DPW right now. So we're having a lot of movement. We're starting to get into the situation where people in the outside market have a lot more leverage than internal individuals. And we're struggling at how to bring them in and create equity internally. So I think that's caused some friction because now most of our staff is at the bottom end of the pay scale as opposed to the top end. So trying to negotiate with outside people is harder. I think for the most part, they didn't see a major change. So the vast majority of our staff, we have probably more HMEOs and laborers than we have anybody else. They didn't see a change. I think the foreman who did get elevated as part of the comp and class really felt like they were finally seen and recognized. Our foremen in Needham, I do think, operate a lot more independently than maybe they do in other communities where it's a little bit more top down and hierarchical. I think in Needham, we have more of a team approach. So those foremen really are the ones on the site managing the staff and managing the residents and anybody else who's out on that site. So I think for the most part, it was positive. I think it was just, there was a bit of a communications gap, I will say, between our staff, just based on, they don't like to talk about this stuff. They don't like the sort of non-quantifiable, non-construction type of the work. So I think there was a little bit of a learning curve, a little bit of an understanding issue of what they were answering when they went through this process. And to be frank, I don't know if they understood how much the town was going to put stock in the study and that, the results of this were going to be implemented as opposed to might be implemented. So I think there's a little bit of a struggle there. Like I said, I think 15, I've asked the question about, is 15 the right number or not? And I know Chuck and Rachel went through a lot of work trying to get to that number. But it's just hard when you have an organization that has a lot of nuance between positions because it just doesn't capture that nuance very well.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that Chuck and I have been talking about is there's a licensure category in the comp and class, and that seems to be like for DPW, it's an all or nothing item. So if you have one license, you get all the points and there's, whatever that is. And everybody in DPW is required to have a commercial driver's license. So there it is. That's created equity right there. But then for our, backflow person who we're going to be filling soon, he has 2 additional licenses with the state that he has to maintain in addition to the CDL. And there's really no way in our structure to accurately reflect that. And so those are the things that I think we might need to massage in the future.
Give them comp time. No, I didn't say that. Then that's illegal. Okay.
No.
Careful.
No, not with our legal.
But it's hard because not all of this is not an exact science. Classification and compensation. It's just not an exact science. And some of it, as you said, Karis, goes to the input that they provide on their surveys and the information they provide. But it's also important to have the supervisors really taking a close look at all of that and understanding what's going on. And to some degree, it's the education and communication with the union reps who are also looking at all of these positions so that there's an appreciation and understanding that it's not just about, well, what about me, right? That there's an explanation for why things have evolved. And so, to pick up on something that you just mentioned, I think a lot of it is in the communications. Like, how are you communicating these changes so that you don't have the people that Rick and I are always concerned about who are raising their hands and saying, well, wait a minute, I'm over here. Can you pay attention to me? Because the worst thing is, and I appreciate the effort that all of you have put into this, because the worst thing is to have it done on a faucet drip basis, right? Every couple of months you get one staff member who's concerned about it, and you're running through the hamster wheel.
Yeah.
Joe, did you have any questions about this? Any of this?
No, I think they've been answered. I wanted to know whether there were any future anticipated appeals or anything like that, but I think that's been addressed yet.
Yeah. One more question, Vivian, not to belabor the point. Karis, how good do you feel about what you've done with these positions, bumping them up a grade?
I think it's going to be helpful for staff morale, particularly, I know like in our fleet department in particular, I think they were very frustrated by the end results, especially when they look at other individuals who require the same type of education out there. I think they were really looking at the skilled trades as an example, and there are differences. And Chuck and I went through, and there were certain things that, definitely didn't match up, and there were things that did. But I think it will help provide a better pathway within our organization for people to get licenses. It's hard to get people to take these tests. Currently we pay for the classes, they are involved. The testing, we'll cover it once they, when they pass the tests, and we cover the licensure, but it is a time commitment. And so I think most people here, unless they're looking for a job outside of the town, they want to see some sort of benefit, or at least some sort of ladder that they could grow on once they achieve those licenses. So I think that this will help. I mean, I mentioned the water treatment plant operators, but when I've talked to our current two who are retiring shortly, and I asked them, do they know anyone in other towns? And they said they're all retiring at the same time. It's a huge group that are leaving every community, and there's not a huge amount of private sector participation in the water industry. So it's not like other industries, I can get drivers from the private sector, this just doesn't exist. So providing that opportunity internally, I think will be helpful in order to get some of those individuals who might have been on the line shifting towards getting those licenses.
Gotcha. Thank
Would
you.
it be helpful for those individuals who are retiring to have some, sort of career development, professional development, mentoring conversations with some of the less experienced operators so that they can appreciate the value of having the license and maintaining their skills and growing? And maybe, just as one last thing, maybe having that conversation with Chuck about how to distinguish between the licenses that individuals have and recognizing it somehow, whether it's with a different compensation, whether it's saying, there's a bonus involved if you get the license, it's not just paying for the course and paying for the licensure, but that there's some sort of an incentive.
Yeah, we have a succession planning program that was kicked off with DPW about 1.5 years ago, knowing that we were having retirements that were coming up, and we're just starting to hit that group of people. So we have an internal applicant pool that we've been discussing different licensure options, people who are interested in moving up. And we are partnering them internally to try to get some education. COVID provided us some interesting opportunities to pivot some people around because we had to create separation between, to be frank, licensed people. We couldn't have all of our water operators at the plant at the same time. So we were able to switch some new people in, which was helpful, and help some people get some contact hours as well so they could move up in their licensure process. So we are working on that, but the mentorship idea as a more direct relationship is an excellent one as well.
Great.
Gotcha.
Any other comments, questions? Tatiana, Chuck, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, thank you. Thank you for listening, and thanks, Karis, for coming and explaining the changes.
Vivian, do we need a motion at all?
Yeah, I'll entertain a motion, and I have something here that I would suggest that the Personnel Board vote to recommend adoption of the following reclassification changes within the established classification and compensation plan. To wit, classification of the master mechanic, changing it from grade 6 to grade 7. Classification of the equipment mechanic, changing that from grade 4 to grade 5. Classification of wastewater operator, changing it from grade 4 to grade 5. Classification of the water treatment operator, changing that from grade 4 to grade 5. Classification of the public works technician, changing that from grade 4 to grade 5. And changing the classification of the scale house attendant from grade 3 to grade 4.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
There you go, Rick.
I'll
I can thank our studious staff.
I'll second it.
Thank you. All in favor?
I
Okay. Okay, Rick Lanetta, I'll take a roll call vote.
Yes.
Joseph Hurley,
Yes.
and the chair Vivian Shu votes yes.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Do we have any other business we need to chat about?
No, I don't have any here from staff. I know you had a meeting in the summer. It's good to see you all again, and you were in good hands. Tatiana
Oh.
did an excellent job while I was out, and that was very clear as soon as I came back. So I'm really thankful to
Excellent.
her.
I
Oh,
can't
yeah.
leave this meeting, Chuck, until you screen share a picture of your latest edition. You just can't
What?
leave.
Yeah, see them both.
Oh, they're all on my phone. That's all I have is pictures. Yeah, Karis and we were
Oh,
actually
Karis, congratulations, Karis.
out at overlapping
you.
times.
All right, so you're both gonna have to hold your phone up to your camera.
There you go.
Let's see.
Oh,
There's one. There's Leo.
Dude,
excellent.
Yeah, poor Kate had both of us out simultaneously for a month and a half, so.
How was her trip? How was her 3-week vacation?
It sounded wonderful.
Good.
Jealous, and I'm sure Katie did fine.
Yes.
She did. Yep. It was a good. We're all back now and fully staffed. Knock on wood.
We don't know what to do with ourselves. Ooh, you're
The background.
it's the background, yeah.
Yeah,
oh,
oh,
Oh.
precious,
adorable.
precious.
Thank-
Well,
Oh,
congratulations
yeah,
to everybody.
congratulations. Okay,
Glad you all had a nice summer.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you all. I hope you had a nice summer as well. It's good to see you all virtually. Someday we'll get back in person, but
Do so.
it's good to see everyone.
If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Joe.
A second.
Thank you, Rick. All in favor?
Aye.
aye,
Joseph Hurley,
yes.
Richard Lanetta,
Yes.
and the chair Vivian Shu votes to adjourn. Thank you all for your hard work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
See you
Take
soon,
care.
Hopefully.
bye, everyone. Yeah.
Bye.